Hello, everybody, and welcome to the White Hatter YouTube News Show. I'm Brandon.
I'm Darren.
Let's get into some news topics, shall we?
In the news.
First big news topic from last week is
Again.
Apple's new AirTag updates makes it easier to spot stalkers.
We kind of get updates on these AirTags almost every month, almost weekly now, don't we? So what's this update?
This update basically has improved the searching function and allows the AirTags to be the unwanted ones louder when they signal, hey, this shouldn't be in your area, ding, ding, ding.
You know, what's interesting is it's working, whatever they're doing, because I'm on a bunch of parent tech forums online, and a lot of parents are posting, hey, listen, I just got this message on my iPhone. What does this mean? And it's this right here.
Probably,
AirTag,
yeah.
right?
And yeah, apparently the speakers could be toned louder, and that's what Apple did. I mean, it doesn't stop the issue of people buying modded ones or modding them or using other tracking tools out there.
That are cheaper.
But generally speaking, good job.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
They listened, and as a result of that, they're attempting to make the changes. It's just a really good example, once again, of building something without maybe thinking about privacy and security at the ground level.
I mean,
right?
you could have made them louder. Why not make it louder to begin with? But
Yeah.
anyways, moving on. New update feature from Google. New options to remove your personal information from search results.
This one's interesting. Is it kind of like the European right to forget? What do you think? Is it kind of like that?
Yes and no, kind of.
Yeah.
So how it works is basically under certain situations, you can request Google to remove indexing of sites that are clear and present danger to you, whereby there are threats, you're being doxxed, where all your personal information.
What's doxing again? Just for
all
those
your
people
personal information is being leaked on the internet in order to harass, intimidate, and all that stuff. The information you can request to fall under these terms to have the site removed from Google search information, bank accounts, credit cards, images of IDs, handwritten signatures, physical contact information as well. And what you have to do is you have to submit a request to Google, identify what the issue is.
And then they'll make the ultimate decision, right? Now, what's interesting about this is that they kind of did the same thing about this time last year for those under the age of 18 who wanted pictures removed of themselves. Remember? Last year they announced that, if you're under the age of 18 and there were pictures that were indexed of you on Google, that you could put in a submission and have them de-indexed and removed from Google, and now they've gone to this next step. So I think what is happening here is the pressure's on, right? Like if you look at what's going on in the EU right now with respect to privacy issues and the amount of pressure that's being put on Google and all the big vendors right now, I think they're trying to get ahead of the game as best as they can here in North America to kind of blunt what's going on, especially in the United States right now with, the government, the Senate, and the Congress looking at the Section 230 that we'll talk about a little bit later. Another thing the safe harbor section, because of how much information these big vendors are collecting about us and making public.
Yeah.
Like a good example, that's how the platform Spookio works, right? Like Spookio works on screen scraping or doxing personal information and then putting it into their platform. So if you're searching a name, you can find out all kinds of information if it was publicly available online.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know what the effectiveness of this program is. I think it's more of just a signal. Oh, look, we're doing good things. I mean, because ultimately, if Google...
Are you saying they're trying to gaslight us?
If Google basically is, not indexing this, doesn't mean the other sites aren't.
That's the issue too, right? Like if you get it removed off of Google, unless the information that Google is de-indexed off the site in which it originally was appeared on, Google is probably gonna what's the word I'm looking for? They're probably gonna crawl the site again eventually, and then that information is just gonna get re-indexed into Google. Like we see this all the time when we're working with clients.
I would assume their system, when they enter the URL of where this information is being posted of you, it probably will indicate to their AI, hey, this is something you need to keep an eye on. Don't re-index it. Yeah,
it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think it's a good move. Like anything's better than nothing.
It's a good move, but overall pointless.
Yeah.
Because...
Yeah, I think we need to start moving to the kind of the right to forget attitude that Europe is.
But even then, it's kind of pointless.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
Because you would have to connect to every server that has your personal information and have them remove it.
I think
to forget, it's the same. It's the same program that Google has. They're just expanding it.
Yeah, I do think that we're starting to see some changes in this because of education at middle schools and high schools on, teaching youth now how to protect their privacy and to prevent the internet from knowing everything about you.
Yep.
Whereas in the past we didn't. And, that's why my generation and your generation, there's lots of information to be harvested out there.
Yep.
Because this wasn't on top of mind because it wasn't an issue. I think today's generation, combined with some of the stuff that we see going on now, is going to make it a little bit harder for the internet to know as much about them as they did my generation and your generation. Thoughts?
I think for millennials and boomers, I think in regards to, we have information that's more publicly available.
Yes.
For generations to come and generations upcoming right now, it's not so much information that's publicly accessible. Right. The information is just privately being sold.
Right. Yeah.
I would argue there's more information in regards to newer generations.
Okay, yeah, I see
because
what
of all the metadata that's being sold by data brokers,
especially with Generation Z and the new Alpha, right? Because we're the new Alpha generation, right? That's the kids that right now in grade primary and coming into middle school, they're known as Gen A right now, Generation Alpha. Yeah, I would concur with you that a lot of these sites are storing that and collecting that private information, and they're not necessarily selling it per se.
I think it makes it harder right now for cyber criminals to exploit the information, but I think right now it's easier for corporations to exploit for their financial opportunities.
Yeah, that's why we've been saying for a couple of years now that, as a lot of people know or don't know who's watching this show, I mean, we're both open source intelligence investigators.
Yes.
I think a lot of these changes are going to make it much, much harder for those in our field to access information as easily as they did with the millennials and the boomers compared to the Gen Zs and the alphas.
Or it will cost a pretty penny for you to request data from a data broker to buy the data.
Yeah.
Which is most likely what's going to happen.
Yeah. It's interesting, right? Interesting. So again, good on Google to a degree. I mean, for kind of at least giving you the ability, but it's still a process. So I guess the question is why even Google allow people to post it on your site and index it in any event, right? Why not? Because I'm sure you have the ability to prevent that.
Yeah, they're putting labor and effort into something that ultimately has, I guess, honestly, I don't know. Why are you putting effort and labor into something that ultimately doesn't matter?
Yeah. Well, it may matter, right? I mean, as we know, we teach that program called Leveraging Social Media for College, University, Sport, and Employment Opportunities.
Yeah.
And this is important to today's generation who's in high school because we know that the internet is collecting that information and using it, and it can either be used for good or bad. So, giving the ability to young people and even adults help minimize what the internet knows about you, especially when it comes to doxing issues, right? When it comes to fraudulent crime, I actually think that that's a good thing, right? Anything we can do. But again,
cyber criminals aren't just using Google.
No, I know
right?
that.
They're using all the platforms.
Yep, for sure.
And,
sure,
it might prevent the normies
the normies
from because
what's your definition of a normie?
People who just use Google, period, end of story.
Okay, they're normies?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
People who just use Google, fine. Okay, great. But for anyone else who has
normies.
Yeah, I know, right? Anyways, interesting move, ultimately pointless.
Yeah. Well, I'll disagree with you on that point. I don't think it's pointless. I do think that it's for those people who are getting doxxed as a result of it. It's another tool that they can use. It's just sad that they have to make the effort to Google to have this stuff de-indexed when Google could potentially do it themselves. But anyways.
Elon Musk wants to make Twitter DMs end-to-end encrypted. So
just before you go on here, just before you go on this one, right? Like Elon Musk, I kind of give him a big tip of my white hat when it comes to the space race and what he's done with Dragon and SpaceX and all that kind of stuff. Like and Tesla. Like I just the channel that he's the Hyperloop or whatever it is he's called. Like great idea. This and what he's doing with Twitter is just. Like, I think that this may cause the downfall of Elon Musk financially. I think the amount of I do. We'll see. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, right? But I just think. But this
every billionaire needs a hobby.
Yeah,
his hobby's Twitter.
Yeah, my God. But anyways, what's going on this one?
So, not saying it's going to happen, but Elon has suggested interest in making Twitter DMs end-to-end encrypted, kind of pointing out how the effectiveness of Signal has been in user privacy, safety, and security. And he kind of wants Twitter to follow same suit, which is interesting because Twitter could be a competitor to Signal in regards to a messaging platform, while also at the same time being a social network. And I think that could put Twitter in a very interesting position.
Yeah, he's made a couple of suggestions on, like, one of the suggestions he's put in there is to allow an edit button on Twitter. I kind of like that idea.
He's also suggested paying for embeds. If someone wants to embed your tweet on like a news site, it will cost money.
Oh, interesting. But I'm kind of torn between the encryption. Like, as a lot of people know, we are privacy hawks here at White Hatter. And, encryption from a privacy, security, and safety standpoint is kind of cool. The flip side of the coin, however, is how the criminal element now can use the power of encryption to escape responsibility and accountability by law enforcement. Right? That's the concern I have. And so, it's I'm a real, like, sometimes I'm thinking yes, sometimes I'm thinking no. But, I always look at who our target group is when we're teaching is primarily youth, although we're doing a lot more of adult education now. And my fear is that those who prey upon our kids for sexually inappropriate behavior, predation, exploitation, whatever it is, child sexual abuse material, are going to be using these encrypted apps more and more because they know they escape the scrutiny of law enforcement.
But there's always been encrypted apps, right? There's always been a way to more effectively hide your communications. It's just the difference is that more apps provide it.
But the other thing, I think the reason that they'll go to encryption is because it's a lazy person's way to say, when they're put under the microscope, to say all this is happening on your platform, for them to say, well, how do we know? It's encrypted, so we don't see it. If it's brought to our attention, we'll deal with it. So I also think that this whole encryption thing is also a lazy person's way for these vendors to go, well, we had no idea. We don't know what's going on. It's fully encrypted, so unless it's brought to our attention. So, this brings back the argument of the Section 230 secure harbor, or the Safe Harbor Act, where it prevents these vendors from being held responsible for what people post on their platforms. And I have made a real shift over the past couple of months now where, I think the time has come. We've proven, it has been proven for years now, that these big platforms, Twitter, Meta, whoever it is, Meta, whoever they are, they can't police themselves.
Well, they have deployed artificial intelligence to...
It's window dressing, right? Like, because ultimately they're responsible to their shareholders, right? Yep. So as a result of that, there's a true conflict of interest when we allow them to police themselves, right? So, I mean, that's one reason why police agencies now are being policed by external agencies in most, not all cases. But I think the time is now coming where the Section 230 needs to be revisited, because I do believe that there's a responsibility for these vendors, be it Twitter, Meta, whoever it is, that there needs to be more accountability for them to deal with these things. And if they're not dealing with them, they should be hammered as a result of that, because until such time as there's consequences to actions on these vendors taking some action that is brought to their attention and they're not, there's no impetus for change. Off my soapbox.
But they're not law enforcement agencies.
No, but
so they cannot.
Well, that's my point.
Unless you're going to deputize Twitter.
No, that's my point.
What you don't want to do.
No, that's my point. My point is we can't leave it to Twitter and all these other big vendors to police themselves. So as a result of that, we need to change the Section 230, and that there's an oversight, much like they do with the Australian E-Commissioner's Office, where they have a provincial group that overlooks to see what's going on. And if they see something, they go to court. But the problem that they face is that these vendors have the protection of the Section 230, right? So that needs to be revisited.
You don't want to be held accountable. If you make a little tiny website, do you really want to be accountable for what a user says on it?
Yes.
You want to be accountable.
You have to be, because you're the one who owns the site and you're allowing that communication to take place on your site.
But you're doing the best things in your ability to block the things that are nasty.
Yeah, but my argument is that most of these big vendors aren't. That's my argument.
Their threshold is low because they can't have false positives.
No, their threshold is low.
They can't they can't stop. They can't
No.
silence free speech.
Disagree. Their threshold is low because they know that if they put a higher threshold, people are going to leave their platform and go to somebody else's platform. That's the reason why.
And
because
they'll get false positives.
It all comes down to, well, that's why you have an investigative body in place to make sure that you're not getting false positives. That's why we, in identifications, fingerprinting, they always, whoever the officer is who identifies the print, they give it to a second officer who does it to prevent false positives from taking place.
So you're proposing another government agency to do that?
Well, yeah.
Who's paying for it?
I guess the vendors will be, because you'll tax them.
So they're paying for a government agency. Don't you see that a bit of a problem?
No, I don't. We do that anyways, right? That's what taxes are all. A lot of these groups, these big vendors aren't paying their share of tax. Look at Amazon. I don't think he pays anything to tax, right? Like they're not. We just can't allow these big vendors to police themselves. Some are doing the best they can, and those ones okay, but there's many others that aren't. And as a result of that, they need to be held accountable. Now, I know that you said, if we get rid of Section 230, you're going to kill the internet. Maybe. Maybe it'll create a different type of internet.
Propose what that will be.
I don't know. We couldn't propose what today's internet was going to look like 10, 15, 20 years ago, right? But right now, these vendors are allowed to act without any consequences. We're leaving it to them to police themselves. And in the end, they're not going to make the tough decision if it's going to affect the bottom dollar to their shareholders. So as a result of that, we need to have an external body that will.
Okay. Now, who's the body? North American body? South American body, European body,
I know,
right? Because unfortunately, as we've seen right now with the UN, there is no overarching body over the UN, right? We're seeing problems right now today with that.
Well, I think because a lot of these vendors are located.
Aliens.
By the way, you took a picture the other night of these flying things in the sky.
Oh yeah,
yeah, they look UFOs.
They were SpaceX satellites.
Were they?
Yeah,
burning up.
They were just being launched into space.
From where?
I don't know where, but apparently this week or last week, SpaceX was launching a bunch of satellites in space, and
cool.
Those are reportedly some of the satellites being launched.
But I'm really torn on this. Like I understand the encryption, and we recommend VPNs for that one of the very reasons, right? To encrypt data from a privacy security standpoint.
But if there is crime happening, and let's say there is whatever bad is happening, end in encryption, but the other end, people take a screenshot of it and report it to police, right?
Right.
So I mean,
unless it's happening within the group themselves, right? Like, and that's what's going on with child sexual abuse material. It's being traded using encrypted apps amongst pedophile groups themselves.
It's always happened like that.
Yeah, but before you could easily get a warrant to go ahead and put for a better word, a bug onto a phone line. And
but there's ways
prior,
around that.
Yeah, there was, but
there's always been technology to circumvent surveillance.
Right, but in most cases, the surveillance was working quite successfully. Yeah, but today, you talk to law enforcement, you just read law enforcement around the world. These encrypted apps that they're using, like Signal, is making it very difficult for law enforcement to do their jobs.
But the technology is also making it easy for law enforcement to exploit rights.
I get it.
As we've seen through a bunch of leaks and reports and lawsuits.
I get it. And so, that's where bad case law is created, i.e. Feeney here in Canada, because cops are doing things they shouldn't be doing, right? So I get it.
Unless you want every cop to have a law degree, which is financially
But even then,
possible.
even with a law degree, there are going to be those that are going to bend the law to meet their needs, right? Like we're our own worst enemies as well sometimes in law enforcement. I'm ex-law enforcement. But again, I'm on the fence on this encryption issue, right? Like I get it, but I also look at the negative side of things, right? Like, so especially working with kids. So.
Yeah. And last news story from last week was Microsoft Edge will soon include a free built-in VPN to the browser. Now, however, it was always limited to a 1 gig plan. So, I mean, big whoop. I mean, okay, great. You get 1 gig of a month of a free VPN through Edge. So I'm assuming this is a trial run. I mean, Microsoft's pretty big. I'm sure they can large scale a free VPN.
No, this one's interesting to me because I think this will put some pressure on, because VPNs have become far more popular over the past couple of years, right? For obvious reasons. And so there's all kinds of third-party vendors out there that are selling it. Like we use one called PIA, Private Internet of Access. We love it, right? But the question I have with this one is because it's owned by Microsoft and it's going to be for free, will Microsoft still be collecting the metadata that people are doing when their VPN is on? Because as we know, a lot of the free VPNs that are presently out there, that's one of the ways they make their money, right?
Yep.
Is when people are using them, those companies are still collecting the metadata that people are doing by using the VPNs and selling it. So now the question I have is Microsoft going to do the same thing? Because as you know, PIA, private internet access, they don't do that.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, you pay for it, right?
Right.
Hard to say. I mean, Microsoft has the philosophy over the last, 10 or so years with its Windows versions of tracking, calling back to Microsoft servers and all that stuff. So this does kind of go against their recent behaviors of tracking and identification.
Yeah.
And so I don't know.
This is one that's going to be interesting. We'll revisit this in a year. Diary data, Brandon. Just to see, because I want to get my hands on the terms of service and their privacy statement specifically to their VPN, because I bet you dollars to donuts that they may be still collecting the metadata.
I don't know if that wouldn't be a good look on them, though, right? People will find out. People
many
will call
people-
them out,
Yeah.
and then Edge will get a worse name.
Yeah, but how many people, how many of the average users really care about that, right? That's my point.
Well, perhaps Microsoft is really trying to focus and push Edge as a browser, which is honestly just an offshoot of Chrome, anyways.
Yeah, but didn't Microsoft 360 look at the issues they had with the privacy issues that they fell into? Isn't Microsoft 360? It's owned by Microsoft, right?
Yes.
Look at the privacy issues. They never disclosed what they were doing, right? Until somebody went, "Hold on a second here," and it blew up in their face.
Yeah, and then they make changes, right?
Well, to a degree.
So I don't know if this is going to be a good thing or a bad thing.
Sorry.
If they're trying to if they're trying to promote Edge, this could be a great way of having
absolutely.
What would I say? Oh yeah, normies. The average internet user from basically here. No need to do complicated VPN setups. Well, it's not that hard anyways.
No,
but
not.
some people are hesitant because they don't know because they're tech illiterate. So if they say, hey, your browser comes with it built in for free, it could be a good way of jumping people over.
Yeah,
to
I mean,
Edge.
it's from a marketing standpoint, I think it's a good move.
Yep.
But I still think there's a number of things that need to be unpacked here. And my big one is, are they collecting the metadata? Because if they are, I still wouldn't use their VPN. I would still use the third-party VPN that I'm using, right?
You only get a gig.
Yeah, exactly. That
If they
too.
roll this out to like a 50 gig plan, well, then maybe you might get something a little bit different.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's news stories from last week.
Right on.
Thank you all so much.
Good show.
And we'll see you all next week.
See.
Bye,
Bye, everybody.
Stay safe.